Hello, welcome to another Apps for Good App Inventor tutorial. I'm Sat and I'm going to be walking you through how to create a password protected notes app. This app is going to be using the new multi-screen feature found on App Inventor since it migrated onto the MIT servers. The multi-screen feature allows you to have multiple screens in your app, which most apps have. This app's also going to be using the TinyDB component. So if you haven't used the TinyDB component, I'd recommend you use that. Just have a go at the to-do list app tutorial, and then you'll kind of understand how that works, because we won't be going fully into that. It's mainly about looking at the multi-screen component and creating this password protected notes app. So I'll add some links to those tutorials in the video, in the description under this video. So let's start this tutorial off. First of all, if you are following along, if you could go to the App Inventor website, click on a new project, and let's give this project a name. Let's call it Password Notes and hit OK. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a password protected notes app where you get to, similar to the to-do list, you get to make some notes, type them out, and this time the only way you can access those notes once you've saved them is to enter a password. So it's going to need more than one screen. We're going to need one screen where the user enters their password, and if the password is correct, it's going to go to the notes. So let's start off first with creating the first user input page that has the password on there. So there's a few things this page is going to need. It's going to need, or this screen I should say, this screen is going to need a box where the user can enter their password. So we could use the regular text box as an input. But with text boxes, if the user starts entering their password, so let's say password for example, what happens is other people if someone was looking over their shoulder, they'd be able to see the password that they're entering, that they're typing out, and that's not really very secure. So luckily, App Inventor has another text box that, so I'm just going to delete this. App Inventor has another text box called the password text box. So this actually changes each letter to that little kind of dot to indicate that each letter, although it has been entered, it can't be viewed. So this is a much better password, much for security wise anyway, it's a lot better. So let's start off first by putting that on the screen. Let's imagine the users put their password in, they typed them out. They now need a button to be able to press to submit that. So let's add a submit button to the screen. Rename this, change the text that's being shown to submit, so a user knows that they're supposed to press it. And let's rename these components as well. So I'm going to rename that button 1 to password submit button. And I'm also gonna, I think password text box 1 is actually okay for now, so I'm gonna leave that as it is. So let's also change the background of this app as well, make it a little bit more interesting. So I've got an image saved on my computer, so I'm gonna go to the properties of the screen 1 component, click add, and then choose the file that I want to add to the background. So in this case, it's going to be, let's see what I've got. It's a locked icon at the moment because the user hasn't entered their password yet. So once that's finishing uploading, we should get the lock image. There we go. So the idea is the user would enter their password, hit submit, and it would go to another screen. So this is the first time we've used additional screens. So if you want to add another screen, what you have to do is right at the top of your page, just beneath the My Project Design, Learn and Debugging, you have a You have save as, checkpoint, and add screen. So that's what we want to use. We want to use add screen. So if we hit add screen, you get the option to to add a new screen and to give it a name. This part, since adding screens is actually still under development, there's a few things that you should take into account when doing this. The first thing is it asks you to give your screen a name, and this name that you give, it actually is permanent. It can't be changed. Unlike other components you can rename them. With the name of the screens, you can't change. So whatever you have here as the screen name is going to be permanent. So it's very important that you either you leave it as just screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, and then you have a in your head, or maybe you make a note of what each of these screens represents. Or if you do change the screen name, as I'm going to do, you want to make sure that you save it as something that you're going to really remember, and that's relevant to that particular screen and what that screen is going to be displaying. So I'm going to change this to real notes screen, and I'm going to hit OK. So that was the first thing you need to realize when you're using screens, is that the screen name is permanent. You can't rename that. The second thing you need to know about screens is you can't, at the moment, the only way you can test out how screens work is by actually packaging the app onto a phone, onto an Android phone. You can't just run it in the emulator. It won't work. It only works on as a packaged app on a phone. Okay, so let's have a look at this now. So usually when you have a screen, you just have like the palettes, the viewer, the components, and properties. Here now in the viewer section, we have screen 1, which is our original screen, and next to that we have another button, which is the real notes screen, which is the one I just called it, which displays our other screen. Every time we add a new screen, a button will appear here, just above this, the viewer display, and that each button will represent each screen that we've added. So it makes sense to now add some notes to this screen if this is the note page. Let's drag a text box to the screen. Let's go down to the properties of that text box, change the width to fill parent and the height to, let's try 300 pixels. So now the user can put their notes into this page. Alright, so what we need then is similar to this to-do list tutorial, is we need a TinyDB to save or to store the notes that the user makes. So if I just drag the TinyDB onto this screen, it'll pop down to non-visible components. But what they also need is a button to save the notes that they're taking. So if I just change the text that's displayed for that button to save notes button, save notes, that'll do. And if I rename this button so I know what it is when I'm looking at it in the component section, to save button btn, and I'm going to change this to notes text box as well. So notes text box. There we go. Let's open up the blocks editor now and try and add in some of the logic behind how to save the notes. So I'll just give that a few seconds to load. So we've got the blocks editor open, and what you'll notice is if I have the blocks editor on the right hand side of the screen and the design window on the left hand side of the screen, if I click on if I have the real notes screen selected, it will display what blocks are associated with that. So if I click on my blocks, it says the notes the real note screen, the save button, and the TinyDB one. If I click on screen one, it will show me what blocks are associated with that particular screen. So it takes a few seconds to load, but once it does load, you should be able to see the password submit button, the password text box, and the obviously the screen one itself. What we want this app to do is the user would enter the password, hit submit, and it would, if the password's correct, it would send them to the real note screen. So this is where things might get a little bit tricky for us as developing it, because it sounds pretty straightforward. There's quite a few things we need to take into account. But let's start off with some of the basic stuff that we are aware of. When the user hits submit, we want to check the text box. So let's go to the button first of all and take out the on-click, the .click event button, event block. And what we want to do is we want to also take the password text box .text, because that's what we're going to be using to check to see if it's the correct password or not. What we're going to do is we're going to use some control blocks. So we're going to use the if control block, and what we want to do is to see if this password is correct or not. So let's add some logic in. So the logic that we're using is if this password is equal to the set password that we have, which is I'm going to create the random password app so good. Let's say so if the password text box .text is equal to app so good, then we're going to let the person go on to the next page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to create a text variable, and I'm going to call that password, and I'm going to set that password as apps for good. So now what we're doing is, if the password that the user enters is the same as our password, so if I go to my blocks, my definitions, and I use the variable, which is just holding the password that I've created, then we can go to the new screen. So this logic should look quite familiar to you from a couple of the other apps that you've created in the past. But what we're going to do now is quite new. What we're going to do is we're going to change the screen now, and we're going to change it to the real note screen. So you'll notice, although we've got real note screen in our on our designer window, there's no real note screen under my blocks, and that's because there's no way of linking them through the blocks editor, no built-in blocks anyway. So what we have to do is we have to kind of manually connect to that screen. So if we go to the built-in ones, we have under control, closer to the bottom of the page, we have a block called open another screen. So if the password's correct, what we want to do is open another screen, and for the screen name we want to enter a real note screen. As I said before, we don't have a real note screen there, so what we have to do is we have to use the built-in text block and just manually create that ourselves. So I'm going to put a text box in, I'm going to change that to real notes screen. So that pretty much is how how a login would work, or a password login. If the user inputs the correct password into the text box, if that's equal to a preset password that we've created, and we create here as a variable, the password is equal to apps for good. So if the user enters apps for good in the text box, then it will open another screen, and that screen will be the real note screen. If it's not, well, nothing will happen. So that's that screen done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the real note screen. So if I click on the real note screen in the viewer, the blocks will change now to reflect the blocks that are actually on our viewer. So it takes a few minutes to change. It's best to wait for the change to take place fully, and not to try and force that or to change any of the blocks while that change is happening, simply because you could lose blocks while that's happening. Okay, so we've got our real notes screen up, and we've got the blocks that are associated with that. What we want to do is we want two things to kind of happen on the screen. So the person's put the correct password in here on the screen. We want them to be able to enter in the notes into the text box and hit save, and for it to save the notes to the TinyDB that we have here. And we also want them to be able to load the notes that have been saved, or the last notes that they wrote the last time they used the app, off with saving the notes. So let's go to what we want is them to hit the save button and for it to save the notes. So if we go to the save button, when it's been clicked, we want to store that value into the TinyDB. So if we go to TinyDB one.store value, we want to store it into the DB, and what we're going to do is we're going to store the value of the text box itself. So if we go to the notes text box, and we take note text box dot text, that's what we want to save. So that's what we want to store in our database, and we're going to tag that now with our own a bit of text, so we can reference the information in that text box, because we're never going to know what that information is. So I'm going to reference that as notes.db, notes.db. That way, if I ever want to call those notes or use those notes in the future, all I have to do is reference notes.db, and that will be called. So we've done that. What we also need is when this screen actually initializes for the first time, which initialize just means loads, really, or starts up, we want the information from the TinyDB that's been previously stored to be loaded up on the text box that we have on screen, so the user can read the notes or edit them as well. So to do that, we'll go to our My Blocks and would go to our Notes text box. We would want to set that. So if we look for a block that's kind of relevant to that, so if we go to Note text box dot text, we scroll down, we've got quite a few. We want to do a set, so we're going to do set note text box dot text to, and what we want to set it to is the TinyDB stored value. So if we get to the TinyDB and we do TinyDB1.getValue, so we want to get the value that's associated with the notes DB, so that should be all the previous messages that we've stored. So if we just copy this with Control and C and Control and V, so let's copy and paste it, and we've now got a way to set the text box to be equal to the value that's stored in our tiny database. Now what we want to do is we want to call this kind of this method that we've created, this little function. We want to call that every time the screen, every time this screen loads up. So to do that, we need to go to the real notes screen, and we want to use the block for initializing. So when the real notes screen initializes, that's when we want to set the text box equal to the information in the database. And when the user has finished typing their message and they hit save, we want to store the new information and overwrite the previous information, which is what the save button will do. And that actually is in the entire app. The basic version of how to create a password protected app. So that's the end of this tutorial. Hopefully you know how to use multiple screens now, and how to as a bit of a refresher, how to use a TinyDB, as well as how to use the password text box as well. So you can see this is quite a basic tutorial, but hopefully you can see how you could use this to do quite a few other things. So you could use multiple screens for like an about page, or anything you wanted really. And in fact, this tutorial, you could take this in quite a few different directions. So at the moment, it's just you put in your password. If you get it correct, it takes you to the your notes page. But what you could do is, if you got the password wrong, it could send you to a fake screen. So it would make the person. So if someone was using your app and they won't, you were using it behind your back, and they're trying to get in and see your notes, and they put in the fake password, it would take them to another screen. Where it showed them what those notes were, whatever you wanted in there, just to make them, to kind of get them off your case. And you could also have another screen, for example, that let you change the password. To do that, you'd need to reference the password, and so it would also need to be the password that you're using would need to be in a database. In fact, what I'll do is I'll add in 2 more tutorials, and I'll put links to them in the description below this video, and I'll just make them in PDFs so you can just read through them, and I'll transfer this video tutorial to a PDF doc as well, so you can read through it in your own time if you prefer to do that instead of the video. What I'd love from you guys is just to let me know how this video was. If it was too fast or too slow, or if there's anything I kind of glazed over and you would like me to spend more time on, or even less time on, that's fine. Also, if you have any requests for some tutorials, there's any features that you'd like to see that you haven't seen yet, let me know, and I'll try and do that. So yeah, thanks for listening. Hopefully that was of some use to you.